We have another guest to help us through these thickets, Jonathan Sacerdoti, who is the director of the Institute for Middle Eastern Democracy. Welcome, Jonathan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Now, if you were Mr. Netanyahu, you wouldn't be remotely bothered by that visit by President Obama, because a man that Mr. Netanyahu plainly made clear he didn't want re-elected as president has come along as tame as a pussycat on your hearth, didn't he?
Well, certainly the trip was a big display of friendship. Whether or not we feel it was genuine or not is another matter. But it seems clear that the two countries were keen to point out their continuing close bonds. However, I wouldn't necessarily come to the conclusion you just have. After all, the surprise of the whole visit was the apology made by Benjamin Netanyahu to the Turks at the last moment of Obama's trip. Of course, absolutely by Obama and the Americans. And so I think that was probably the big unexpected move for everybody watching it.
But that's very good news for Israel, because the last thing Israel wants is Turkey becoming more and more angry or more hostile to Israel.
It's a big country, Turkey.
I mean, the situation, though, is that when Obama sat down with the Palestinian leadership and said to them, you should start negotiating with Israel irrespective of the settlements, it's almost impossible to conceive that Abbas can do that, is it? Because he'll be outflanked by Hamas.
Well, there's two things to just discuss there in what you've said, Ken. And one is about Turkey, which is true. It's good news for both Turkey and Israel that they should resume the good relationship that they once enjoyed. Both parties, of course, benefited from that, not least in intelligence sharing on Syria, which, of course, is now a continued concern for both. So it is definitely good news that President Obama managed to engineer that, and the same with Kerry dealing over the past week or two with the Turks, and now, of course, Kerry is still in the region. He's about to visit Abbas in Amman and have meetings there, and then move on to speak to Benjamin Netanyahu in a slightly lower key way than the visit we've just seen. And in terms of settlements, as you brought up, I mean, the Israelis maintain that settlements shouldn't be an impediment to negotiations. But, of course, under the pressure of Obama during his first term to free settlement building, they did that. And, of course, I think Obama's reluctance to make that a continued demand on the Israelis is probably a direct result of the fact that the Palestinians still didn't return to negotiations for most of the 10-month settlement freeze that Netanyahu put in place.
Surely it's because the Americans weren't prepared to do anything about it. And, of course, the problem that bedevils all of this is the significance of what would be, if there was a two-state solution, the Palestinian bit is the biblically significant bit for Israelis. And so the more you build settlements, the less likely it is that there could ever be a two-state solution. So it's slightly waving two fingers at the Americans, isn't it? Which, that's what he does, and that's what he gets away with. We have to, however much we may worry about what the long-term implications of that are, he knows how to move on, and he doesn't worry about the most powerful man on earth, does he?
Well, look, I don't think we can necessarily interpret it exactly that way. It is a fact that Benjamin Netanyahu was the first ever Prime Minister of Israel to put in place a settlement freeze of any kind, and it was always said to be a fixed-term, one-off confidence-building measure. It didn't appear to build the necessary confidence in Mahmoud Abbas and his Palestinian Authority in order to return to negotiations until 2 months before the end of it. Of course, they then collapsed. So I think it's very hard to put the blame totally on.
Well, we're not putting the blame totally on him. I just asked you a question, but you mustn't feel too persecuted by us, because we're actually quite reasonable people. But I think back to the late 80s when, as a Foreign Office Minister, I visited Israel and the occupied territories, and I had the opportunity of a meeting with Mr. Shamir, and I said to him, "I'm a 40-year-old." British man with two young kids. If I was a 40-year-old Israeli man with two young kids, what possibility do your policies open up that my children will ever live in peace with their neighbours? 25 years on, with the predominant political element in Israel being the sons, if you like, of Shamir. I mean, that's where the policy would be going. It's still not a question that anybody can really answer with any positive spirit at all, and that's sad, isn't it? When you think how the rest of the world has moved on, Northern Ireland, stuff like that. It's sad, isn't it, It's sad. If I was a young Israeli, I think it was sad that I'm going to have to spend so much of my life in the military. I'm going to have to listen to a whole lot of paranoia about, we're not going to survive as a state and all the awful stuff that at some point you'd like to think people could get rid of. Hmm?
Well, of course it's sad. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want my children to grow up in that sort of environment either. On either side, I think the tragedy of the situation with the Arab-Israel conflict is that generation after generation on both sides has suffered from a lack of optimism for the chances of peace. I think that what's important to note since those days when you did visit Israel as a minister, and in fact, even some would say the vision that Obama outlines in his speech, is that we can't ignore some of the things that have taken place since then. For example, withdrawal from the Gaza Strip by Israel didn't bring about the move towards peace that I believe the Israelis hoped for. And so when Obama speaks in Jerusalem to an audience of young Israelis and tells them that they need to take bold steps in order to achieve peace or move towards peace, I think it's very hard for them. It's very easy for them to agree with that in principle, and you heard the cheering and whooping that they did in reaction. But it's also very hard for them to block out the fact that, yes, they are the people that, as you just expressed, live in danger of the terror attacks, even the 2 rockets that were launched during Obama's visit from Gaza into the south of Israel, hitting residential property, one of them. So I think it's very hard for those young Israelis to completely pin all their hopes on peace, following the lines of Obama's wishes and those which you're understandably hoping for, when in fact they also know the realities of the security situation mean that should there be a total disengagement from the West Bank right now, the chances of Hamas seizing power are great. I mean, they did that in Gaza, they could do that in the West Bank, and that makes Israel's security situation very complex. So I think while both sides absolutely strive for peace and both sides are committed, they say, to a two-state solution. Certainly the Palestinian Authority and Fatah say they are. Hamas, of course, doesn't. But bearing in mind that Netanyahu again reiterated his support of a two-state solution repeatedly during this visit, Obama did so, even Abbas did so, it seems that, the ambition is there on both sides. And, of course, among the next generation, the ambition is there. It's to do with the realities and the security situation allowing or not allowing progress to that end.
Jonathan, thank you very much.